state to see what these American diplomats were up to. But in the course of, we were together about 2 weeks in the food desert. And in the course of time, we became friendly, became more relaxed and more at ease. And one of my colleagues had just had a second daughter. And knowing the the macho Arab male, particularly the Bedouin, and he was a Bedouin from the food, he was sort of apologetic about it. And he said, oh, no, he said, there's nothing to apologize for. He said, last winter I was sick. I was quite sick. My daughters heard about it. They left their families and came back and were with me. He said, I couldn't get the sons to even visit me. He said, give me daughters every time, which I thought was rather unusual to hear that from an Arab. And then I remember him saying at one point, we asked him if he had more than one wife. And he said, yes. He said, I have 2. And we want to know, how did that happen? I mean, what's the mechanism of that? And he said, oh, it's very simple. About 4 years ago, my wife came to me and she said, you know, Mahmoud, it's time you took another wife. And Mahmoud said, are you crazy, Fatima? We've raised 2 daughters and 3 sons. We've had a perfectly good marriage, and I don't have any intention of taking a second wife. And she said, well, you may not, but I do, and you will take another wife.
Really?
And she said, look, I've raised this family. I have taken care of you. Now I need help around the house, and you're going to take a second wife. And Mahmoud said, but what does the prophet say? If you take a second wife, you're going to have to treat her equally. You can't have an upper wife and a lower wife.
Right, right.
And she said, of course that's true. And he said, well, that will mean children. And she said, well, of course it means children, and I shall be like a grandmother to them.
Oh my gosh.
So Mahmoud said, you know, with that kind of argument, I had no recourse, and so I took a second wife.
But that's very open
it's a very interesting. But darling, I had in mind something different, but this was a nice story, but I had one other story that you told me, which was even more surprising in a way, because they are accustomed to have more wives, so in a way, psychologically, they are more accustomed to have this type of, okay. But you told me that with all that repression of women, there was a minister who, when he had to take decisions, that was the thing I wanted to tell them.
I mean,
he
would receive
the
members from the embassy, whoever had business with his ministry, and they would lay out their requests and the requirements were, and he would say, yes, I shall have to think about this, and would disappear. And he was disappearing around the corner behind a screen where his wife sat and told him what to say.
His wife was there to listen, and she was the one who decided.
Oh my
No,
God.
I can remember being in the soup. They found out because it happened repeatedly. He always disappeared behind the screen when somebody had asked him a question.
And that was his wife. Well, no, can you imagine?
Yeah, I can imagine it
the
very
women
easily.
being so repressed, and nevertheless,
Are so powerful at the same time.
Yeah.
I can remember being shopping in the souk
I couldn't believe that.
in Riyadh, which is the very heart of the Nejd.
Yeah.
And I was negotiating a price, and I suspect it may have been a jewelry shop, and it was kind of unkempt, but it had a lot of gold, as these Arab souks do have, and there was a big pile of rags in the corner, and it looked pretty dusty. And when we went back and forth heading toward Hilmi, he suddenly broke it off and went over to the pile of rags to talk with her. And the pile of rags was the woman who owned the shop. And she was sitting in the corner in black, of course, all hunched up, and she was telling him what to put on for the final price.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So you see,
there's a lot
they
of
find
power
that
behind the
there
scenes.
can be power in some individual women in every world. Look at that.
Yes. Yeah, even in some
Even
of the
in
most
yeah,
repressed.
yeah.
I mean, when you think of Saudi Arabia, although
No, but you see, like for instance,
But
I
it was,
tell you-
yes, it was. I remember one Saturday I was down in the souk, and there came a local Saudi who worked for the embassy and knew me, and he invited me come up to the house and have tea. And I was with my wife, and he said, you know, when we get to my house, we'll go one way and she will go the other. And she went and visited with the women. Okay. And I stayed with the men and had my tea, and when it was all over, we converged and left.
Unbelievable.
But you see, I mean, I was telling you the story about an aunt of mine, but you know how the context was then, and it came to be also after that. So you imagine this First World War, but it also was, for instance, if there happened a wedding where the bride was found not to be a virgin, the scandal was so huge that they would take her back on a cart with nails. I mean, something awful, very cruel, and there were many suicides. Oh, it was not a joke, you know. So, I mean to say, the whole thing was that in that way. That there were very strong women, but at the same time, the women folks were not really...
There were a lot of repressed women, too.
Very much repressed, yeah.
So it's really in all cultures.
Yeah, it's in all cultures.
I always think of the Middle East as being the worst, but that's because I'm not familiar enough.
It's a more nuanced situation.
In the Middle East?
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
They're very vocal about it.
And they are not so unique
about their repression.
So are the South Americans.
Yeah, that's true too. But, well.
And you end up with an Eva Peron. So
exactly.
it's always a bit more complicated than...
No, that's very true.
In the end, it is also how those people